Wrestling is a tough business, and Great North Wrestling is the land of the tough guys, Canada's home of strong style wrestling. The Great North Wrestling Podcast is the official podcast of Canada's most popular wrestling YouTube channel, the HANNIBAL TV, hosted by two-time Canadian champion and former national champion in freestyle wrestling, Olympic trials silver medalist in Greco-Roman wrestling. Trained in the Hart family dungeon, he has over 15 years experience in the wrestling business as a wrestler and working behind the scenes in numerous companies. Hannibal, the Death Dealer, aka the HANNIBAL TV. Lead reporter, Devin Nicholson.
Okay, this is Hannibal from the HANNIBAL TV here, and I have on the line Brian Zane, the Z-Man from Wrestling with Regret, one of the most popular wrestling-related YouTube channels on YouTube. So how are you doing today, Brian?
I'm doing great. Hannibal, thanks for having me on.
Well, it's a pleasure, and you are using the Z-Man moniker now. Have you ever heard any feedback from Tom Zink about that?
No, and it's funny. People have given me crap about going by the Z-Man name because of the connection to Tom Zink. I'm like, I didn't come up with a nickname, okay? Like, some of my friends started calling me that, and then it stuck, and that became my nickname. Like, it was not self-appointed. So, I take on the responsibility of the Z-Man name, but I didn't try to steal Tom Zink's heat. But I haven't heard from him, or I also have a couple of fans. That's about it.
Yeah, nobody really remembered too much about Tom Zink until recently when Tony Schiavone started mentioning him on his podcast. I don't know if you've heard.
Yeah, I've been meaning to listen to that one. That's kind of a sad statement. Nobody really thought about Tom Zink until...
I think I remember one match of his against Brian Pillman or something, and couple other, and I was a WCW fan.
Honestly, I'm kind of even more ignorant to that because, I'm aware of who Tom Zink is, but I've never actually watched any of his matches. Like, I've seen him, make introductions. I saw him on the Family Feud episode back in the day, but that's about it.
So for those of the listeners that don't know, what is Wrestling with Regret?
Well, Wrestling with Regret, it's a channel that I came up with 4 years ago. 4 years ago, next week, in fact. At the time of this recording, and we are, it's basically a channel that takes a look at the funniest and silliest and worst wrestling angles and gimmicks and movies and merchandise of all time, basically. And by of all time, I'm usually just only going back maybe 30 years. Just when wrestling was popular, man. No, it's just like, the best way I could describe it is the nostalgia critic of the wrestling version of the nostalgia critic. I don't know why I'm so frazzled right now, but yeah, it's like if anyone is familiar with the series Nostalgia Critic, it's that whole angry reviewer genre that it was big for a while. Single camera, scripted reviews on bad things in certain mediums with funny jokes. And the reason I came up with a show was because, I saw that those genres of videos, like Nostalgia Critic, Angry Video Game Nerd, Phalus, Child in the Shadows and stuff, and there are all these different genres people were reviewing, and no one was reviewing wrestling. And I'm like, well, maybe I can do it because, I'm a big enough fan. I've been in the business for a long time now as a manager mostly. And, I have good creative writing chops. I have video production ability, so I'll do it. And that's kind of where it began. And 4 years later now, I'm doing pretty good.
Yes, your video production ability actually shows through greatly. As for someone that doesn't know much about video production, your videos are very professional. And some of the stuff you've reviewed, if for anyone listening to this, I guess the Pile Driver album, No Holds Barred, the infamous Heroes of Wrestling pay-per-view, which was always one of my favorites to watch, but not for the match quality. It was almost unbelievable how bad that is. But actually, there is something that I posted yesterday on my channel you might want to review. Larry Sabisco, who we did a shoot interview with on the HANNIBAL TV, I did a podcast with him a couple days ago, and he sent me a song that he did in around 1985, and he told me that I could post it on my YouTube channel, and it's called Boo on Me. And
that'd be a pretty good idea for an episode, is to review not albums, because I've reviewed most of the albums, but review just LPs and singles by wrestlers that never like got mass production, like Zabisco's song or that weird "I'm Your Man" song by Roddy Piper from like the '90s.
And Hillbilly Jim
or
had a couple too.
Didn't Jerry Law cut an album or two?
He did. There's a couple other people that have too that they don't come to mind right away, but I know.
And Terry Funk. Terry Funk cut an album as well.
The Road Warriors actually sang a song too that wasn't too bad actually. It's on their DVD. I think Jimmy Hart actually wrote it, and they did it in the Memphis territory.
Nice.
It's more of a rap, but you could throw that one in there too. Speaking of wrestlers that sing, they always call it the Coco Beware bar for the WWE Hall of Fame that they put him in there. And a lot of people feel that it might be because of his singing on the Pile Driver album. Do you think Coco was a good choice to add into the Hall of Fame, and what do you think of his voice?
I think his voice is the worst thing I ever heard. Excuse me. Coco was before my time, and I can't say I've watched a lot of his stuff to really know if he was truly, deserving of a Hall of Fame induction. But every year there's a mid-carder who gets in. It's like, oh, okay, I guess I wouldn't have guessed that. I think this year was kind of the one exception for Hall of Fame where it's like, yes, everyone makes sense, everyone's a star, everyone's long overdue. But for most years, you always get that one mid-carder who's like, okay, well, he was around long enough, I can see it. And Coco Beware, he was charismatic, he had a following, he had a good gimmick, and it was a memorable one. And so, yeah, sure, put him in the Hall of Fame.
And maybe you could answer me this question about the Pile Driver album, since you seem to be somewhat of an expert on it. When I used to have the tape for the Hillbilly Jim song on there, I think it's called Waking Up Alone, it said...
the ballad.
Yeah, it's sung by Hillbilly Jim and Gertrude. Now, from what I recall, Gertrude was his pig. So, are they trying to make us believe that the pig is the female voice on the album?
Oh, I hope that's what it was. I hope that there was some unplanned music video or some planned music video where they never actually rolled it or never got released, where it's a pig puppet singing the female part with Hillbilly Jim.
Yeah, because that is not on the... there was a video cassette of Pile Driver, and mysteriously that song wasn't included on the video cassette, which is a great video cassette for anyone listening. If I actually picked it up at a used video sale about 10 or 15 years ago, and I must have watched it at least 6 times in my life. But you're from the West Coast, which I was just reminded of. I called you 3 hours early for this interview, and I was a big fan of the San Francisco territory. I'm too young to have really experienced it, but I've read a lot about it, and I'm friends with superstar Billy Graham, and he's told me a lot about how great Roy Shire was. And I was really impressed to see that, I guess it was possibly last month, there was actually a independent wrestling event at the Cow Palace in San Francisco, and you were there for that. You actually posted some interviews on your Wrestling with Regret YouTube channel with John Morrison and some other people that were involved in that show. But how was the crowd for that show, and what was it like to be involved in something that is in such a historical building?
Yeah, I think it was a great experience overall. I got a lot of content from my channel out of it in the build up to my portion of the show, and the reaction video itself, to my actual match. I think it was really cool. It was the first indie fed to run a show in the Cow Palace in I think 35 years, some long time. Because before that, WCW did some shows there, WWE did some shows there. It was still kind of a frequent place for big wrestling events, but not local stuff. But Marcus Mack and John LaRocca had All Pro Wrestling. It was a long-term dream, a long-term goal to do that with APW, and that was a goal that even Roland Alexander was skeptical of before he passed. But Marcus Mack made it happen, and it was just really cool to be part of that history. To manage at the Cow Palace would be great, but the fact that I actually wrestled there was kind of a trip because I was trained by Buddy Rose and Colonel Beers, who are two guys who had that experience working for Roy Shire. They wrestled at the Cow Palace, so it was of significance to me, kind of a sentimental value in that respect. And I think the crowd, the actual draw was I want to say roughly 2,600 people. We pretty much filled up like the first, many rows on the floor itself, and then like the slightly elevated floor above. And I think it was great for an indie show. I think for a Cow Palace show, it was great.
Is there any plans for them to return there? Because I imagine the building was very expensive to rent.
Yes, in fact, they actually just made a date last week. It's November 10th of this year. They're going back to the Cow Palace. So for anyone listening who's in the Bay Area or nearby the Bay Area who wants to see some awesome wrestling action, that's a good place to start. It's Cow Palace, November 10th. If you go to All Pro Wrestling, their Facebook page, I believe, for more information.
But you mentioned you were trained by Playboy Buddy Rose, who was famous for those blow-away commercials, which could be on Wrestling with Wregret themselves, I guess, because they were in the WWE magazines, and they even featured those commercials on their Superstars television show, from what I remember. What are your memories of Buddy Rose?
He was great. It was cool to learn from him and from Ed, from Colonel De Beers, about just what psychology was. Just learning that whole facet of wrestling that, to me, I was kind of oblivious to, and I think a lot of fans who've never been in the ring, to understand what that is, and just some of the advice I got from him. And by that point in his life, he was not, taking many bumps anymore. He wasn't doing much wrestling at that age, but every once in a while, every once in a blue moon, he'd get in the ring and take a bump, and it was it was kind of like a white tiger. It was a very rare instance at that point. So it was always very memorable to see him actually get in the ring and show us moves. Like Colonel did a lot of the physical work in the ring. Buddy would help out occasionally. He had a heavy hand in it, but as far as the physical stuff, it was mostly Colonel De Beers.
Did Colonel De Beers ever tell you the story of when he accidentally ripped off Kerry Von Erich's foot in a match because he didn't know that it was artificial?
The prosthetic?
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually found out about that. I think I was reading Meltzer's first tributes book, and Kerry Von Erich was a chapter in there, and it talks about that incident. That was how first time I ever heard about it. And I read that after having trained with Ed for a while, so I actually asked him about that, and so he told me more about that. That was just it sounds like a crazy story.
Yeah, Larry Zbyszko actually told us that story in his shoot interview, and that's also up on our channel as a individual clip for anyone listening that wants to hear him tell it, because he tells it in a very funny way. So just search Larry Zbyszko on Kerry Von Erich if you're listening to this and want to hear his version of it. And I just talked about the blow-away stuff with Playboy Buddy Rose, but for anyone listening, before he became a enhancement talent in WWE, he was actually a star in the AWA, and I guess one of my favorite matches of his was him and Doug Summers against the Midnight Rockers in the AWA.
That was a feud that definitely put the Rockers on the map, and I know Shawn Michaels has said in his book and things about how much he credits Buddy and Doug, especially Buddy, with how his career developed the way it did and how much he learned from him. Buddy was he was starting the AWA. He was like the king of the Pacific Northwest territory and did pretty well for himself in the Roy Shire territory as well. But I mean, Oregon was pretty much his home for a long time. That's like where he got his best years. He feuded with Roddy Piper before Piper went to the Carolinas and became a big star. That was like his second to last run before, working for Vince McMahon. Buddy is kind of like an unsung hero for in wrestling in a lot of respects.
I think I met him once at the 2004 Cauliflower Alley banquet, and he seemed like a nice guy, but that was towards his final years, and his weight had become a little bit larger than even the WWE days at that point. I don't know how he was just before he passed, but
he's still pretty big. I mean, he's the one man I know, and it's I don't want to speak ill of the dead or make fun of him, but I mean, he's the one guy I ever knew who had a coke problem and a weight problem. Of course, he was clean by the time
that is true, isn't it? Because that would suppress your appetite.
So yeah, I mean, he was clean, of course, at the time I knew him, but yeah, it was just I think as far as his weight goes, that was really interesting because he told me once that when he worked for the WWF, Vince McMahon once said in a meeting to everyone, okay, everyone has to work out but Buddy, because Vince knew that was Buddy's gimmick. Because Buddy was, when he was wrestling on a regular basis, he was very athletic. I mean, he was a tubbo, but he could still, like, do one-handed push-ups. He could do kip-ups. He was very athletic. He was a three-sport athlete.
And
so
he could take big
like
bumps, too, from what I recall. Like, he got
huge
good
bumps.
airtime.
One of his trademark bumps was kind of this thing where he would kind of fall, back first out of the ring through the middle and bottom ropes, or middle and second ropes, and, like, kind of hook his heels on the bottom rope as he fell. It looked gnarly, but he did that, like, almost every night. Buddy was an athlete. I think people kind of write him off because of the blow-away diet thing, but that was, like, I recall that being, like, him and Jimmy Hart's idea. Like, they just kind of came up with it on their own. That wasn't like someone trying to bury Buddy.
No, it was, it got over, for sure.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
And another guy that, well, probably the wrestling personality that your name is most synonymous with is Jim Cornette. Could you tell us how you first came in contact with Jim Cornette, and any funny stories you might have of him? Not all of them, but maybe your one funny anecdote or something from your...
Yeah, well, I mean, I reached out to Jim a couple of years ago because I had done my Cornette Gets It Wrong video, which is one of those ones that I think really helped put me on the map. It was 2 years into my channel, and I saw him retweet that link, and other people as well. But the fact that Cornette endorsed it was, like, so huge to me because Cornette's a big influence on my character in wrestling as my manager character. So it's like I looked at Jim in a big way in that respect, and so for him to get the seal of approval was great. And so I had another idea for a video that I wanted to try and get Cornette to do a cameo in, and so that's how I reached out to him. I already had that in because he likes the last one I did. So me going to Louisville and having him make a cameo appearance for what I was doing was, I think, a big thing. I'm glad that I was able to make my way into that contact zone because I made a video that he liked. I don't have too many stories about Jim because I only saw him only for one day, that day in Louisville, like Labor Day weekend 2 years ago. It was just the time got away from us. We didn't have too much time to hang out after we did our shoot together. But he was great, and his wife, Stacy, is great. I had lunch with him and the two of them and Kenny Bolin and Kenny Bolin's son at the local Chili's near OVW because there was, like, time to wait for people we needed to get. So we had lunch, and I do remember Kenny Bolin chewing me out because I had my phone out at one point. I've had a hard time live that one down.
Does Cornette make his orders as meticulously as the folklore says when you eat lunch with him? Is he as meticulous about his hamburger or whatever?
I'm trying to remember. I think at the time he actually did not order a hamburger at this particular Chili's. I think it was like he ordered like chicken wings or, dare I say, a salad. I don't know. I mean, he was looking pretty thin. He was looking pretty trim when I saw him because he'd been, working in the yard a lot that year, and so he was losing weight that way, just sweating it off. So
now you saw him off camera. Is it true? Some people think that his heat with Vince Russo is he just keeps it going because his listeners like to hear about it. But from your experience, did you detect if there really is that genuine hatred there?
Well, I mean, there's been times when we've talked about it, and he goes into his full, boisterous thing, his rants about Russo and stuff. The Cornette in podcast form and the Cornette in real life are not that far apart. And there was a time when I tried to pitch with Cornette, I had this brilliant idea. What if, Jim, we get you and Russo together to do a debate or something? And he says, that would probably, outdraw, everything except for WrestleMania that weekend, but I can't do it because if I'm there, I'm going to kill him. Like he said, it was a great deal of sincerity. And so he laughed at my naivete, and I kind of let it go after that. But it was, I don't think it's an act. I mean, maybe he still kind of kayfabes people on it, and maybe it keeps the truth among a very small circle of friends. But I don't know. I think, this grudge might be the real thing.
Well, I actually interviewed Vince Russo in Colorado last December. That's up on the Hannibal TV YouTube channel. And the day before I interviewed Vader, and I spent the entire day with Vader, hung out with him, and I can honestly say that with Vince Russo, the moment we were done the interview, I didn't have any desire to hang around with him any further. But he is a nice guy as far as being a nice guy. He showed up on time. It was his pleasure to do the interview. But I definitely don't agree with his opinions or his use of the word bro. I think we put a bro-o-meter up for that particular interview. And I think the interview was around 2 hours, and it was something like 180 times he said bro. And I didn't realize it at the time of the interview, but I think is from editing, like I had to edit, like you have to watch these things numerous times when you're editing them.
Yep.
So by the time I was finished editing it, I was ready to kill him because I was so sick of hearing the word bro. But as a person, as an individual, he is a nice individual. I will give him that. Although he definitely did more to destroy the WCW title than I think anyone else in the history of WCW.
Right. I think, I kind of reluctantly defend Russo because I think he does get a bad rap. I think that, honestly, from my personal experience, if it weren't for Vince Russo, I wouldn't be a fan of wrestling because I came into being a fan just around the time he was head writer. So if it weren't for the things he was putting on Raw every week, I don't think I would have stuck around. I'm not sure if I would have, eventually kept watching wrestling for as long as I did. So I give Vince Russo, a personal set of gratitude in that respect. And I think that he made mistakes as a head writer, but no person in creative capacity in wrestling bats 1,000. No one has ever been flawless. Paul Heyman came up with the damn crucifixion angle, and everyone thinks he's a genius. So
I don't actually think Paul is a full genius just because his own company went out of business. So someone who hasn't run a successful company, I couldn't really call them a genius, but he definitely has some fantastic ideas. But if you're not running a successful company for more than a decade, you can't really say the guy's a genius because he failed at running his own company. But right. Yeah, but with Vince Russo, I will give him 1 point. I think he said in our interview that since he's been out of booking professional wrestling, the TV shows, the ratings have gone down every single year, and actually that trend is still happening. The ratings of Raw have actually been going down every single year. Now, I'm not saying that's all him or anything like that, but that's definitely a trend because last October, I think when Goldberg came back, they spiked the ratings, and that was one of the highest ratings they'd had in a long time. But I went back and looked at the previous October's ratings, and the previous October without Goldberg was still higher than that October. So the ratings have still been declining over time, and that's unfortunate. But at least we've seen some spikes in recent weeks. What do you see? Do you think that the ratings are going to continue to decline, or with Ring of Honor possibly getting on more channels, with New Japan, it looks like they're expanding into the USA. Do you think the extra competition might help possibly create another peak of interest in wrestling in the next couple of years?
Here's the thing. I think wrestling definitely has a lot of interest at its peak, honestly. I mean, it's not mainstream anymore like it was in the late 90s, early 2000s, but, like you said, there's Ring of Honor, there's all these wrestling promotions that are getting so much exposure with the proliferation of the online community. I feel like the wrestling fan base at large is larger now than it's been. It's just that people aren't wanting to pay for things. That's another issue, because you've got, pay-per-views that people don't want to buy. You've got cable packages people don't want to buy. And all these wrestling federations, a lot of them are putting their stuff out for free on YouTube. It's just, I think it's a combination of the proliferation of making wrestling more accessible online and the fact that there is the TV landscape now is a lot different than it was during the last boom period as well. DVR didn't exist for example, and there wasn't, it wasn't as easy to find short and sweet videos online that showed you what happened. I think, and there also were not as many hundreds of channels then as there are now. I would like to see a comprehensive study of like a bunch of different shows and how their ratings have gone in that same time period, because obviously WWE's ratings are down, and that sucks, and a lot of it's on them. But I would almost say it's a combination of things. It's their own doing. It's also the way TV has evolved since the last big boom period. And it's also how online has evolved as well, and the need to we don't need to put our whole shows online. We'll just put highlights, and we'll get a bunch of people to share it.
And of course, Kevin Owens as champion didn't help. I'll just point that out because it drew one of their lowest ratings in 20 years. I'll just point that out because we have kind of a personal vendetta. But you mentioned
it's true about that, because the people, so many smart fans, they cream their jeans when Kevin Owens won. Oh my God, he's the best ever. But it's like he looks like my friend from college, and I think history shows a lot of the biggest champions, the most probable champions, are the ones who don't look like everybody else. The best wrestling stars don't look like everybody else. They're large.
To cross into the mainstream, yes, you're correct, because your average person on the street, or for me, for instance, one of the reasons I fell in love with wrestling at a young age was for the superhero look of them. They didn't look like my father, or basically...
Yeah, at one point this year, you had Kevin Owens and Bray Wyatt as your world champions, these fat, bearded guys, who, yes, they can wrestle perfectly well, but, I think a lot of it's about the look. And if you compare it to, what the casual fan thinks of, a championship wrestler, that ain't it.
And one thing I'll give Wyatt over Owens is, at least, even though he is overweight, doesn't look like an athlete, he has a very, good gimmick, and his look is more of a character than Owens.
Right.
So
he looks like an interesting character.
Yeah, so he still kind of stands out more just from that perspective, in my opinion. But definitely, at least with Jinder Mahal, he looks like a champion. So far, the ratings have indicated that he's stirred up a little bit of buzz. So I wish him luck. But obviously, it's going to be a continuous battle with WWE looking for a new star to replace the likes of Cena, who I understand might be going to part-time soon, and Undertaker's retired, of course, so they're going to definitely need to find some new superstars, which I don't think they've actually found yet from this new generation. There's definitely some big stars, but none that have really transcended popular culture, like the John Cenas and the Rocks and the Steve Austins. But just... Sorry, say what you were going to say.
Well, I was just going to say, it's true. I think it's just their business model and the way they do things. Because, they have dedicated so much time to, John Cena and Randy Orton over the years, and Batista even, that, when it came time to try and make future stars beyond that point, they were just so focused on those three that they didn't give a shit about anyone else. And so that made a whole, generation of wrestlers really suffer. And now we're finally starting to see some other wrestlers, deserving wrestlers get pushes and stuff, and seeing more characters and stars made, but they can't all be world champions. That's the problem, is that there's this influx of amazing talent, but they can't all get pushes. They can't all be main eventers. There just have to be people who are left out. And I think that's I think a lot of fans today feel a sense of entitlement, almost a sense of well, my guy is the best because I tweet at him a lot, and so he should win the championship. But historically, there's tons of great wrestlers whose legends are solidified, and they never won a world title. So people forget that.
And as we're just going to wind this down a little bit now, I just want to point out one more thing. I don't know if anyone's heard this, but apparently a couple of weeks ago, speaking of lots of great wrestlers, but also this goes into the look of wrestlers and things like this too. I guess the viewership of the new 205 show was on the WWE Network was actually lower for that week than the viewership of Halloween Havoc 1998, where Hogan wrestled the Ultimate Warrior. I'm not sure if you heard that or not, but it was because I guess Bruce Pritchard had discussed that pay-per-view on his podcast. but it was interesting to see that a brand new show featuring smaller wrestlers had less viewership than Halloween Havoc 1998, which is almost 20 years ago now, and it was kind of a screwed up show. It wasn't exactly the highest quality of wrestling, but at least there was more characters on that show and larger than life stars. But you mentioned, just to finish off here, you mentioned that a lot of people are putting out more stuff on YouTube. I think Wrestling with Regret, at one point you would quit your regular job and you were going to be a full-time YouTuber. That's one of my goals, is to be a full-time YouTuber. But in recent months, everyone that's been involved in YouTube has had a big hit, because I guess YouTube has decided wrestling is now considered very controversial content, so there's a lot less advertising revenue coming to wrestling videos now. I've definitely noticed a huge hit in my revenue, despite my viewership growing literally every week. I'm getting hundreds more subscribers, and I think last month I had something like 1.4 million total views, and that's one of my best months ever, but the revenue payment did not reflect that. So I just want to know if you've experienced kind of the same thing, and if you think, how do you think we're going to be able to fight this issue and still keep in business, because it's expensive and it's time consuming to be in the YouTube wrestling creation business, particularly with me doing interviews with stars. I know you do some interviews with stars, but you're kind of a one-man show as well. So
right, I'm a one-man band, to steal a line from Heath Slater. It is rough, and I am lucky enough that I'm seeing kind of a slow bounce back in my revenue from like a month to month. But it's still pretty scary. It's still not nearly as good as it was before WrestleMania weekend, when this cutoff seemed to happen.
Yeah, it all happened. I invested so much money in WrestleMania weekend, and like the cutoff seemed to happen right then, didn't it?
Yeah, and so that's really unfortunate timing. But I think the goal is to try and weather the storm. But one thing I think has taught a lot of people, including myself, is to not rely on YouTube exclusively for your income. So I've started a Patreon account. I'm trying to look out for sponsorships. It's tough, and it makes it a little more difficult than it was before to make a living off this. I always find it funny when fans are like hearing about the stuff that the YouTubers are going through. So get a real job. I'm like, I am working harder on this show, this channel, than literally any other quote unquote real job I've ever had. This is the most hard. People seem to conflate and confuse hard dream job with not a real job. Like, oh, well, if you're liking it too much, it must not be a real job. And that could not be further from the truth, because, I love this job. I worked very hard at it, but it's also the most fun I've ever had. So anyone listening to this who thinks that that's a good comeback for you to say, think again, because a lot of people like myself work very hard at what we do on YouTube, and I know that Devin is one of them.
Oh, exactly. Literally every waking hour that I'm not working my normal jobs, I'm working on Great North Wrestling related events, as well as building up the YouTube. But unfortunately, due to this new issue with the YouTube revenue, I'm not going to be able to go on as many interview trips. Most of my shoot interviews are going to be from Great North Wrestling events where we bring in a star, like, for instance, Sheldon Benjamin at the end of the month. He's coming to Great North Wrestling June 30th for our Pembroke event. But unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to invest in flying somewhere to get 5 shoot interviews, because that's going to take, at this point, maybe 4 or 5 years to get my money back. But we have a Patreon page, too. It's called the HANNIBAL TV. We have 3 Patreon subscribers right now. So if anyone wants us to help get more revenue to put into interviews, because I invest pretty much a lot of my own money into this. I'm not becoming rich off of this. And also any revenue I have, I reinvest. So my Patreon is the Hannibal TV for anyone that wants to support us. It's only $1.99 a month, and we're posting our full shoot interviews on there at least 2 weeks before we post them public on YouTube. What's your Patreon page?
My Patreon's patreon.com/wrestling with regret. And I've got a bunch of different price tiers. They go from $1 a month to $40 a month. If you go the full 40, you get you get early access to the Thursday videos, 24-hour access 2 days before it actually goes live on YouTube. You get your name in the credits of Thursday videos. You get to submit a subject for my classic pay-per-view reviews that I do once every couple of weeks now. And you also can take part in Q&A podcasts every month. And also you get for $40, you get an exclusive Stunt Granny T-shirt as featured in my review of the Exposed Pro Wrestling's Greatest Secret special from years back.
Oh, God, I'm going to have to check that out, by the way. I haven't seen that one yet, but that was hilarious, particularly the Harley Race part where they put him in the dark room and with Harley Race's voice, like we're not supposed to recognize Harley Race.
Yeah, the great mystery. Who is this mysterious man who's hiding his identity? So the Stunt Granny T-shirt is available at patreon.com/wrestlingwithregret for the $40 backers, but there's lots of other cool perks, too, that are exclusive to backers. And, at the time of this phone call, I think there are about 180 backers, which is really awesome.
That's fantastic. And for anyone that wants to follow you on social media, you wanted to tell us your social media links?
Yeah, so I've got my Twitter handle. It's at Brian Zane. And then my Facebook is facebook.com/wrestlingwithregret. And yeah, that's how to get a hold of me. And then, of course, just go to the YouTube channel, Wrestling with Regret, with the W before the word regret, because I like alliterations. And that's all she wrote.
Excellent. Well, we won't keep you any longer for today, but hopefully we can have you on again sometime to get your opinions. You're obviously very knowledgeable about the professional wrestling industry. Anyone that wants to subscribe to this podcast, greatnorthwrestling.podomatic.com, or we also post it on our The Hannibal TV YouTube channel. My Twitter is at Devin Hannibal. Great North Wrestling Facebook page is at Great North Wrestling. And again, Brian Zane, his YouTube channel, Wrestling with Regret with a W in front. Anything you want to say to close this off, Brian?
No, thanks for having me, and hope we can all recover from this YouTube setback. I think, things will eventually return to some degree of normalcy, but...
One other thing, I don't know if you noticed this too about the setback. I think they automatically unsubscribed everyone that was under 18 from my channel, because right around that time, and I've never had this happen before, and I was putting out very high quality content at this time, I lost 4,000 subscribers in 1 month. I still gained 6,000, but it was like 4,000 subscribers mysteriously were unsubscribed. So I don't know if you experienced that too.
I've experienced the, very rarely do I lose subscribers net loss in a day, but it's happened, and it's weird. I think that's a whole separate issue than the whole non-advertiser friendly thing, in my opinion. I could be wrong. Maybe it could be connected, but it feels like that came about a long time before this new complication.
Okay, because that was the only month that it happened to me where I've lost that many in a month, and I found that was a little nuts, because I've never lost 4,000 in a month, and I had my biggest variety of interviews that month. As I said, we still gained 6,000, so I still ended up 2,000 in the green, but I was a little disturbed by that, considering, as we both said, the amount of work that we put into these YouTube channels. It's really our heart and soul. But thanks again for coming on with us, and everyone, please follow him on social media and check out his YouTube channel. It's highly entertaining.
Thank you for listening to the Great North Wrestling Podcast. Please check out our official website at thehannibaltv.com. For all the latest news and information on GNW, follow us on Twitter at GNW Wrestling, Instagram at GN Wrestling. Subscribe to the Hannibal TV on YouTube for all the latest GNW shoot interviews, match videos, and wrestling promos. And if you like our content, please support us on our The Hannibal TV Patreon page to watch our full shoot interviews, at least 2 weeks prior to them being listed public on YouTube. Our The Hannibal TV Patreon page is only $1.99 per month and is the best way to help us improve production quality and record more shoot interview videos with wrestling legends and MMA stars.